Okay, so now we're just going to go in and finish up the last few slides in the presentation. I'll show you a couple other quick things in REDCap, and then we'll close out today's training. So first, I just want to cover a few tips for data management. And something I hinted at in the training earlier was that naming your variables is really important. So the variable names are used in branching logic, calculated fields, and for piping. So it's important to give these descriptive and meaningful names. You can only have letters, numbers, and underscores. They should be concise but meaningful, so avoid things like Q1, Q2, Q3, which will be difficult to refer to later if you wanted to do any branching logic or calculated fields. They have to be unique within the project. And once the variable name is defined and you have data saved under it, you cannot change the variable name. Otherwise, it will result in data loss, and this is often not even possible once you leave development mode to change a variable name at all within a project. So something to be aware of. So just some, examples of, not so great variable names and probably some better variable names. Try to keep them concise but meaningful. Some other tips. First, think really carefully about your question design, especially if you're doing survey design. Have team members test it first. Something that might be clear or obvious to you might actually be a little challenging or ambiguous to somebody else. So really, if you're making these projects for a survey, it's especially important there, because in a survey you don't have a chance to clarify or restate your question. In a case report form, there's a person that's going to be interacting and doing an interview essentially, so they can always make clarifications, but in a survey that's not possible. So really, for surveys, make sure you spend a lot of time on your question design. Also, try to limit the number of free text questions that can induce errors and make your data harder to analyze. So use things like multiple choice questions where possible, and if you are accepting raw text, use things like validations when possible. Also, avoid relying on calculated fields. I didn't even show any examples of them in the training today. If you're interested in using them, you could check out the FAQ. We really don't recommend using them unless absolutely necessary. It's better to just store the raw data rather than the calculated fields. So collect weight and height rather than just doing a calculated field to collect BMI. Oftentimes it's easier to do the calculations anyway in Excel or R, SAS, or Stata rather than trying to use the REDCap syntax to code the calculated fields. The one time or the occasions where you might want to use the calculated fields is if you want a value in REDCap to branch on. So in that case, you might set up a field to say, for example, if this person had entered the hospital at this date and was discharged more than 2 weeks after that, then send them this particular follow-up survey for an extended hospital stay. Okay, that would be a case where you might want to have a calculated field in REDCap because you might want to do some branching or survey queues based on that. So you could have, you could use what's called a date difference equation in REDCap. Again, that's a little bit more of an advanced feature, and if you're interested in doing something like that, check out the FAQ where they have examples of the calculated fields. In general, though, I think there's been an over-reliance on calculated fields. It's better to do the calculations yourself and collect the raw data in REDCap. Okay, another tip. Be consistent when you're coding your answer choices in REDCap. So similar questions should use similar codes. That's one of the reasons why it's good to use the yes, no, and true, false questions that are already coded into REDCap. You wouldn't want to have a 0 being no and a 1 being yes in some questions, while a 1 is a no and a 2 is a yes in other questions. That just creates confusion, especially if you're going to be doing any branching logic or filters in a report or so on. So be careful and consistent with your coding. The last thing that I want to cover is moving from what's called development mode to production mode. So everything we've done today has been in development mode. We can make big changes in REDCap very quickly. That's nice when you're building a project, but we would want some safeguards in place before we begin collecting real data. And that's because right now with that project that we just built, we've collected 3 test records. If I was just to go into instrument 1 and delete the date of birth field, that field would disappear, and so would any answers recorded from each record that were associated with that field. So if I delete the date of birth field for records 1, 2, and 3, that date of birth field and their dates of birth would disappear. Obviously, that could be a big problem in an active project, and that's why you want to move to from development to production mode before collecting data in your project. There's a couple of requirements for this, though, so I'm going to walk through them now. First, you want to test all aspects of your project while you're in development mode before moving to production, because it is hard to make some changes after production. They require some checks, and doing things like changing variable names often can't be done after moving to production. When you finish testing, and if you're doing a research project and you have an IRB number, then you're ready to move to production mode. You can choose to have all of your practice data that you entered in development mode deleted to kind of clean up your project. And you need to have, at minimum, at least 3 test records put into your project, as well as the IRB number and PEI contact information. Then you would scroll down to the bottom of your page, and I'll show this in a moment in REDCap, and say that you want to move to production mode. Once you do that, safeguards against certain problems will be put in place. So any changes that you would try to make to a REDCap project that might cause data loss or mismatching will automatically trigger a REDCap administrative team notification that will require our approval before implementing that change. You can still make many changes instantly. So you can add a new form to a project. That's no problem. Create a whole new instrument that will be implemented right away. Change a question by adding a new variable to it, adding vitamin C to the other supplements question, that would get implemented right away. It's other changes that would cause potential data loss or data mismatch, like recoding variables, those types of things, or deleting a field, those types of things would require approval from the REDCap team. In those cases, we would automatically get an email from REDCap, we on the REDCap admin team, and then we'll write to the PI of the project and say, it looks like somebody on the team wants to do this, wants to make this change. Are you sure you want to do this? This would cause potential issues with how this variable is coded, or this would cause all of the data associated with this date of birth field to be deleted. If you delete that field, do you want to do that? Let us know. If you say yes, we will implement that change. We'll typically recommend that you back up the project first, just in case, but we can still implement those. So that's just a safeguard to prevent any serious data loss. Okay, so just to wrap up the slides, here are the steps to move a project from development mode to production mode. So first, you're going to design all your data collection instruments. You're going to enter 3 complete test records. That means each instrument has been tested. Whether that's 1 instrument or 10 instruments in your project, all the fields should be entered for 3 full records. If your project is using human subjects and is a research project, you need to have, in addition to these things, you also need to have the PI name, email address, and an IRB number put into the project. You can then request that the REDCap admin team to move your project to production mode. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Under project setup, you just scroll all the way down to the bottom of the project and move to production. The REDCap team will then review your project, and if everything looks good, we'll move it to production mode. You can then begin collecting real data. And in order to make any changes after you're in production mode, you must draft the changes and submit them. And I'll show you how to do that now. Okay, now I'm just going back into REDCap, and I'm going to go to the Project Setup tab just to show you how to navigate that move from development mode to production, and then finally how to make some changes after production. So first I can tell that this project is just in development mode because right up here under project status it says development. Let's say we finished designing our whole project. We've completed 3 test records. That's actually not the case here, right? Because the follow-up form hasn't been filled out for these 2, physical exam for those, and pre-screening for that. So these should all be green, at least 3 test records. That's absolutely required before moving to production mode, just to ensure that you've done some testing of your project. But assuming we've done that, we would then move down to here and we could click this button to move project to production. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I ask that you don't do this on all your test accounts unless you really want to experiment with drafting changes in production, and that's fine. It's just if each of these will send an email to the REDCap help team about moving projects to production. So if you're not going to be experimenting with that in your test project, don't send it to us. Don't agree here to move it to production because that'll just kind of spam our inbox. However, if you do want to experiment with making changes after production, feel free to move one of your projects to production just to explore it. Okay, so I've clicked that button, move to production down here. I get a pop-up saying make sure you enter at least 3 test records, allow 2 to 3 days for REDCap administrators to review and move your project to production. We're usually pretty fast about it, but it does depend on demand because there are over 1,000 projects that a small team of us handles. Okay, I'm going to click agree. This is an important notification then. It says, do you want to keep all existing data? Keep it or delete it. Generally at this point, you've only been collecting test data, in which case you really want to select this option, delete all data, calendar events, documents uploaded, and so on. And that's mainly because there's no way to bulk delete records. So if you have 10 test records in the project and you move to production mode, after being in production mode, you'll have to delete them one by one, which can be kind of tedious. There's some workarounds around that, but it will require you emailing the REDCap admin team and asking for some assistance. So if you just have test data, you'll typically want to say, yes, move to production, deleting all of it. If for some reason, maybe one of your surveys went live and a few people answered it already, you might want to keep all of the data. You would select that option and move to production mode. You'll have to go in yourself though and then delete the test records or send an email to redcap@childrensnational.org and we could help you figure out a way to delete some records slightly faster, but it still takes some effort once you're in production mode because production mode's in place to really protect these changes. So I'm going to just say, in this case, I'll keep my data just in case we want to look at some of the records after production mode. I'm going to say yes, move to production. Now, typically you would now wait a day or 2 for the REDCap team to do a review and move the project to production. But I just requested this on an admin account, and so it assumes that I've given it approval already. And so this project automatically went to production because I requested it on my admin account. So we're now in production mode. We can see that here under project status. It also shows up on the left-hand menu. And that means if we want to make a change in the online designer, this appears. It says the project's currently in production. You can't make changes in real time. If you want to make any changes, you have to draft them. Don't worry, it's not so scary. You just say enter draft mode, and now you can make any changes you want. So if you go to pre-screening, you want to reorder some questions, okay, that's fine. If you want to add an answer choice, you could easily do that. Any of those types of changes will be implemented automatically. Even going back and creating an entire new instrument, physical exam follow-up survey or whatever. Just say P follow-up survey. I could do that, and I could draft an entire new instrument with dozens of new fields. That would be fine. Once I'm done with that, I would say submit changes for review. I get a little notification and I click submit. Any of those changes would be implemented automatically. Success. These changes wouldn't have caused any issues. They were implemented automatically. Why? You could follow this. REDCap did an automated check and found that none of these caused any potential critical issues. Under these conditions, they're automatically approved. Great. If you had entered something else, if you had entered draft mode and you tried to go into pre-screening and change this variable name, well, that actually doesn't even, it's not even possible to do in production mode. If you try to recode these from, male being 2 to female being 1, that would cause an issue. And if you tried to submit those changes for review, you would get a notification, and it would also notify the REDCap administrator. We would then send you an email with a detailed view of these changes that will look like this. This could cause a possible label mismatch because we've recoded these. And we would send you an email and say, these are the problems that might arise. Are you sure you want to institute these changes? We can either commit them, or if you didn't intend that issue, we'll reject those changes and you can redraft, go back into draft mode and try to fix it another way. And we can assist you if you're having issues with that. Okay, so that's how to make changes after production. We're already in production mode. Basically everything else remains the same. The final thing that I want to mention, I didn't mention earlier, is how to view the logging. So not all accounts will have access to the log, but PIs, or people with higher level user rights, will have access to the log. Again, that's all set under user rights. So for instance, in this example, logging, I allowed both myself and this other collaborator to have access to the log, but I didn't allow the data entry person. That's just up to you and whoever's managing the project. Nonetheless, in the log, this is the audit trail where you can see every change that's been made to a project since the very beginning. So starting this afternoon when I created the project, I can see that my username created a project. I added all of these fields, records were created, and so on. I did some data exports. Those are also logged. If I had edited any record, like I updated this record here, updated record 1 with PE information, that's marked, and so on. So this will permanently exist in your project. You could download the entire thing as an Excel spreadsheet, and any change that's done to a project will be tracked in here. If we had surveys, any new survey that was completed will also be logged here. So you can always go back to this for your own bookkeeping and tracking to record any changes. All right, and here I've just included some helpful links at the end of the slides. So links to REDCap, the email address of the REDCap support team, links to the tutorial, other helpful CTSI links. And again, thank you for attending and for following along. If you have want additional information, you could follow that link. Please fill out this training evaluation survey to let us know how we're doing and how we can improve. And if you're ready to request a REDCap account, you can follow that link there at the bottom of the page. It's the same link you would also follow to request data entry accounts on behalf of somebody, or send them that link to request their own account. Thanks.